Get him out of here. Now. The words didn't echo. They cut, sharp and certain, slicing through the polished quiet of the glass-walled lobby like they had been said 100 times before. Ryan Blake didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. The tone was enough. Final. Decisive. Public. Every head near the entrance turned, not because something loud had happened, but because something deliberate had. Malik Thompson stood just inside the revolving doors, one hand loosely at his side, the other holding nothing but a slim phone. No briefcase. No bike. No signal that he belonged in a place where suits cost more than most people's rent. A black t-shirt, clean but plain. Dark jeans. Sneakers with no brand screaming for attention. To Ryan, it was obvious. To everyone watching, it was a moment waiting to unfold. Malik didn't move. Not immediately. Not defensively. Just still. As if the command hadn't been directed at him, or worse, as if it didn't matter. Ryan stepped closer, posture tightening, the faint creak of his uniform belt filling the silence between them. "You heard me," he said, lower this time, closer, controlled. "This is a restricted building. You don't have clearance." There it was. Not loud, not aggressive, but loaded. The kind of sentence that had weight because of everything it didn't say out loud. A few feet away, a woman near the reception desk paused mid-step, her phone hovering in her hand like she wasn't sure if she should pretend not to see or make sure she didn't miss it. Two men in tailored suits slowed their conversation, glancing over without turning their heads fully, the way people do when they want to witness something without being part of it. Malik exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the lobby, not in confusion, not in fear, but with a quiet precision, like someone memorizing details. The marble floor, the security desk, the camera above the entrance angled just slightly too low. He noticed everything. Ryan misread it completely. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Ryan added, shifting his stance just enough to block the path further inside. "We've had issues with people trying to wander in. I'm not going to let that happen today." People. The word hung there, vague but pointed. Malik's gaze settled back on Ryan, calm, unreadable. "And what exactly makes you think I'm wandering?" he asked, voice even, not raised, not rushed. Ryan didn't hesitate. "Experience," he replied, almost casually. "I know who's supposed to be here." A faint ripple moved through the small crowd that had formed. Not a crowd by intention, but by gravity. Moments like this pulled people in whether they wanted it or not. Near the back, a young receptionist named Lauren shifted in her seat, her eyes flicking between Malik and the security desk. Something about the way he stood didn't match the assumption being made, but she said nothing. Not yet. Malik tilted his head slightly, just enough to register the statement without challenging it. "You know," he repeated, as if testing the word for weight. Ryan nodded once, confident. "That's right." Another pause. Not empty. Charged. Malik didn't step forward. Didn't step back. He simply stood there, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the air feel heavier than it should. Then Ryan reached out. Not aggressively, not forcefully, but firmly enough to signal escalation. "Let's go," he said, gesturing toward the exit. "You can't stay here." That was the shift. Subtle, but real. A boundary crossed, not with noise, but with assumption turning into action. A man near the glass wall quietly lifted his phone, angling it just enough to capture without being obvious. Across the room, someone whispered, "What's going on?" but didn't get an answer. Malik glanced briefly at Ryan's hand, then back up at his face. Still calm, still composed. "You're sure about this?" he asked, almost softly. Ryan didn't catch the warning in it. Or maybe he chose not to. "I don't get paid to second-guess myself," he said. And just like that, the moment locked into place, not with shouting, not with resistance, but with certainty on one side and silence on the other. Malik gave a small nod, barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. "All right," he said, not defeated, not compliant, just decided. And somewhere behind that calm, something had already started moving, unseen, unheard, but very real. The kind of movement that doesn't announce itself until it's too late to stop it. Ryan's hand lingered in the air for half a second longer than necessary. Not because he expected resistance, but because he expected compliance, the kind that usually came quickly when someone realized they had been singled out in a space like this. But Malik did not react the way most people did. He did not flinch, did not argue, did not even look around for support. Instead, he took one slow step back on his own, not guided, not forced, just deliberate. And that single movement shifted something subtle in the room, like the difference between someone being pushed out and someone choosing to leave on their own terms. Ryan noticed it but dismissed it instantly, folding it into his assumption that control was still firmly in his hands. "That is the right call," Ryan said, almost approving, as if Malik had just passed a test he had failed moments earlier. Malik said nothing, his eyes briefly scanning the security desk again. The badge reader, the small digital screen flashing green for authorized access and red for denial. The pattern was simple, predictable, controlled by people who believed they understood it completely. He turned toward the exit, walking at a steady pace, not rushed, not slowed, and the quiet murmur that had started near the reception desk followed him like a low current, a few people stepping aside to clear his path, not out of fear, but out of curiosity, because something about his composure did not match the narrative being written for him. Outside, the late morning light hit the glass doors, reflecting the city skyline across the polished surface. Malik stepped through the revolving door and onto the sidewalk, the noise of the street instantly replacing the controlled silence of the lobby. Car engines, distant horns, the rhythm of a city that never paused for moments like this. But he paused just for a second, not to gather himself, but to observe, to confirm, to lock in what had just happened. Then he pulled out his phone, not with urgency, not with frustration, but with the same calm precision he had carried inside. He tapped once, then again, selecting a contact without hesitation. On the other end, the call was answered before the second ring. "This is Evelyn," the voice said, sharp, professional. "Already." Alert. Malik did not waste words. "It is happening," he said, his tone even, almost quiet against the background of passing traffic. There was no confusion on the other end. No need for explanation. "Location confirmed?" Evelyn asked immediately. "Main lobby entrance, east side," Malik replied, glancing once more through the glass doors where he could still see Ryan returning to his post. Already relaxed, already convinced the situation had been handled. "Understood," Evelyn said, her voice tightening just slightly, not with stress, but with focus. "Do you want full activation?" Malik looked back at the building, the structure rising above the street, steel and glass reflecting power, influence, ownership. "Yes," he said simply, "initiate full protocol." There was a brief pause, not hesitation, but execution. "Activating now," Evelyn responded, and somewhere beyond the sidewalk, beyond the visible space of the lobby, systems began to shift quietly, invisibly, access logs pulling in real time, security feeds aligning, internal alerts moving through channels that most people in that building did not even know existed. Malik ended the call without another word, slipping the phone back into his hand like nothing had changed. But everything had, inside. Ryan leaned against the edge of the security desk, exhaling through his nose, the tension already fading from his posture. "Another one," he muttered under his breath, not loud enough for everyone to hear, but loud enough for Lauren at the desk to catch it. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "He did not seem like he was trying to cause trouble," she said cautiously. Ryan gave a short laugh. "Dismissive. They never do," he replied, glancing at the monitor, already moving on, already convinced that whatever he had just handled was routine, predictable, justified. But the system behind him did not move on. Not this time. A small notification blinked in the corner of the internal dashboard, subtle, easy to ignore, except it did not disappear. It expanded, pulling more data, more flags, more attention. And across the lobby, a few guests still lingered, their conversations quieter now, their attention not fully returned to where it had been before, because moments like that did not just end. They waited, they stretched, they built, even when the person in the center of it was no longer standing in the room. And outside, Malik took one step away from the entrance, then another, not leaving, not yet, just positioning himself where he could see everything clearly, the doors, the guards, the people moving in and out without question. He stood there, still calm, still composed, as if the next part had already been decided long before he ever walked through those doors. Inside the lobby, the air did not return to normal. Not completely, even though Ryan had already shifted his weight back into a relaxed stance. Even though the revolving doors continued spinning and new visitors walked in without interruption, something lingered, something unspoken that refused to settle, and it showed in the small details, the way conversations stayed quieter than before, the way eyes drifted back to the entrance more often than they should have, as if people were waiting for something they could not yet explain. Lauren glanced again at the monitor in front of her, her fingers finally pressing a few keys, pulling up the visitor log out of habit more than suspicion. But what she saw made her pause, not because it was alarming, but because it was incomplete. The system showed no recent denied entry under Malik's description. No alert, no note, nothing that matched what had just happened. She frowned slightly. "Ryan," she called, keeping her voice low but firm enough to get his attention. He turned his head halfway, clearly not expecting anything important. "What?" he replied, already sounding dismissive. Lauren hesitated for a second, then continued. "Did you log that interaction?" Ryan gave a short exhale through his nose, almost amused. "It was nothing," he said. "No need to log every random walk-in." But Lauren did not look convinced, her eyes still on the screen. "There is supposed to be a record," she said, quieter now, more to herself than to him. Ryan shrugged, already turning back toward the entrance. "System probably lagged," he said, brushing it off like it was not worth another thought. But the system was not lagging. Not anymore, in a secured office 2 floors. Above, a series of notifications had begun to stack on a screen monitored by a compliance officer who had not planned for anything unusual that morning. Each alert was small on its own. A discrepancy here, a missing entry there, but together they formed a pattern that demanded attention. The officer leaned closer, scrolling through timestamps, matching camera feeds with access logs. And what should have been routine quickly became something else, something that did not align. Back in the lobby, a man in a navy suit approached the desk, placing his visitor badge down with a polite nod. "Checking out," he said, but his eyes shifted briefly toward Ryan before returning to Lauren, as if confirming something silently. Lauren processed the badge, her movements slower than usual, distracted. "Have a good day," she said automatically. But her mind was elsewhere, across the room. Another guest leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "That did not feel right." The colleague nodded. No, it did not. And even though their voices were low, the sentiment carried, because it was shared, because it was obvious. And outside, Malik had not left. He stood just far enough from the entrance to avoid drawing attention, but close enough to observe everything through the glass, his reflection, blending with the building behind him, making it hard to tell where he ended and the structure began. He watched Ryan return to his routine, watched the steady flow of people entering without question, without pause. The contrast was clear, deliberate, and exactly what he had expected. His phone vibrated once in his hand, a subtle confirmation. He glanced down, a single message from Evelyn, Phase 1 complete. Malik did not respond. Not yet. He did not need to, because he could already see the first signs inside. A shift in posture, a hesitation in movement, small, almost invisible changes that signaled the system was no longer as stable as it had been minutes ago inside. Ryan noticed it too, though he could not define it. A slight delay in the badge scanner, a brief flicker on the monitor, nothing that stopped operations, but enough to disrupt the rhythm he relied on. He frowned, tapping the screen once as if that would correct it. "Come on," he muttered, more irritated than concerned. Lauren looked up again, her instincts now fully awake. "That is not normal," she said, more firmly this time. Ryan did not answer immediately, his focus narrowing on the screen as another small notification appeared and did not disappear. And for the first time since Malik had walked through those doors, Ryan felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty, the kind that comes when control begins to slip in ways that cannot be explained away. Outside, Malik lifted his gaze back to the lobby, calm as ever, patient because he knew something Ryan did not. This was no longer about one moment at the door. It was about everything that moment had triggered, and inside that building, whether anyone realized it or not, the countdown had already begun. The tension inside the lobby did not break. It evolved, shifting from curiosity into something sharper, something that demanded attention, and it found its voice in the one person who had been quiet for too long. Lauren pushed her chair back slowly, the soft scrape against the polished floor louder than it should have been, drawing a few glances her way as she stood, her eyes still locked on the monitor. "This is not a system lag," she said, not loudly, but clearly enough to cut through the low hum of the room. Ryan turned fully this time, irritation flashing across his face. "Then what is it?" he asked, crossing his arms as if preparing to dismiss whatever came next. Lauren took a breath, steadying herself. "There is no record of the denial," she said, tapping the screen lightly. "No flag, no log, no note. It is like it never happened." Ryan frowned, stepping closer, his confidence not gone, but challenged. "That is not possible," he replied, leaning in to look, his eyes scanning the data quickly, searching for something familiar, something that would confirm his version of events. But the screen did not give it to him. Instead, it stayed blank where there should have been proof, and that blank space felt louder than any alarm. A man standing near the front desk shifted his weight, watching the exchange more openly now. "You mean there is no record at all?" he asked, not directly involved, but no longer willing to stay silent. Lauren shook her head. "Nothing," she said, her voice tightening. "And the cameras should have picked it up too." That word cameras changed the tone. Ryan straightened slightly, glancing toward the ceiling instinctively, then back to the monitor. "Pull it up," he said, more quickly than before. Lauren moved through the system, her fingers more certain now, bringing up the live feed, then the recent playback. The screen flickered once, then twice before stabilizing, showing the entrance, the revolving doors, the steady flow of people. But when she scrubbed back to the moment Malik had walked in, there was a gap. Not long, not obvious, but enough, a few seconds missing where everything should have been recorded. The man at the desk leaned in closer. "That is not normal," he said quietly, and this time no one disagreed. Ryan's jaw tightened, his mind racing through explanations, technical issues, timing errors, anything that would restore the sense of control he had moments ago. "Is a glitch," he said, but the words did not carry the same certainty. Lauren did not respond immediately. Instead, she looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time there was something in her expression that went beyond doubt. It was recognition. "He asked if you were sure," she said, almost to herself. Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "What?" he asked, but Lauren continued. "Before you told him to leave, he asked if you were sure," she repeated, and now the words hung heavier, because they sounded different in hindsight, because they did not feel like a question anymore. They felt like a warning. A guest near the seating area spoke up, louder than before. "I heard that too," he said, drawing more attention. He did not argue. He just let it happen. Another voice joined in, yeah, like he expected it. The room shifted again, not physically, but mentally, perspectives adjusting, assumptions being questioned, and Ryan felt it. The subtle but undeniable change in how people were looking at him now. Not with agreement, not with trust, but with scrutiny outside. Malik remained exactly where he had been, watching through the glass, his posture unchanged, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp, tracking every movement inside. His phone vibrated again, a second message from Evelyn. "Phase 2 initiated, internal review active." Malik glanced at it briefly, then back to the lobby. Timing mattered, and everything was aligning. Inside, Lauren's screen updated again. Without her input, a new window opening, one she did not access, a compliance alert flashing in the corner. Small but impossible to ignore now. She froze for a second, then read it aloud without meaning. "To unauthorized security action under review." The words landed hard, not because they were loud, but because they were official, because they came from a system that did not guess. Ryan stepped back slightly, his confidence cracking just enough to show. "What does that mean?" he asked, but Lauren did not answer, because she was reading the next line, "Supervisor escalation required." And that was when the lobby stopped pretending this was routine. A quiet ripple moved through the space, people no longer whispering, no longer pretending not to notice, because now it was clear something had gone wrong, not just in the moment, but in the system itself. And outside, Malik finally moved again, one step closer to the entrance, not rushing, not forcing, just returning, as if the building itself had called him back. And this time, the doors did not look like a barrier. They looked like a threshold waiting to be crossed again. The moment Malik stepped back toward the entrance, something inside the building seemed to recognize it before anyone else did. The revolving doors turning slower than before, as if even the mechanics hesitated. And through the glass, Ryan saw him. Not as a passerby, not as someone leaving, but as someone returning with purpose. And that changed everything. Ryan straightened immediately, posture snapping back into position. But this time, there was no casual confidence behind it, only tension. Wrapped in routine, "He is coming back," Lauren said under her breath, not as a warning, but as an observation. And now every eye that had been drifting before locked onto the same point, the entrance, the threshold, the moment about to repeat itself, but under entirely different conditions. Malik stepped inside without breaking stride, his pace the same as before, measured, controlled, unhurried. But the reaction he triggered was no longer the same. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, phones lowered then raised again, not to hide, but to capture, because now it felt like something bigger than a misunderstanding. Ryan moved forward instinctively, placing himself between Malik and the rest of the lobby. But this time there was a pause, not from Malik, but from Ryan himself, a hesitation that did not exist minutes ago. "Sir," Ryan began, but the word did not carry authority anymore. It sounded thinner, uncertain. Malik stopped just short of him, close enough to make the distance feel intentional but not confrontational, his eyes steady, unreadable. And for a second, no one spoke, not because they did not know what to say, but because the weight of the moment demanded silence first. Then Malik spoke, calm as before. "You said I did not belong here," he said, not accusing, not loud, just stating. Ryan's jaw tightened, his instincts telling him to hold the line, to repeat the same authority that had worked before, but something in the room had shifted against him. Something he could not control. "This is a restricted property," Ryan replied. But even as he said it, the words sounded rehearsed, detached from the reality forming around him. Malik nodded once, slow, deliberate, as if acknowledging the script before stepping outside of it. "And you're sure about that?" he asked again, the same question, the same tone, but now it landed differently. Now it echoed with everything that had happened since. Lauren's breath caught slightly as she watched, recognizing the moment from before, but this time with context, with consequence. Ryan did not answer immediately, his eyes flicking briefly toward the security monitor behind him, where the compliance alert still blinked in the corner, persistent, unignorable. Then back to Malik. "Yes," he said finally, but the word lacked the certainty it once held. And Malik saw it. Everyone did. The crack, small but visible. And that was when a memory surfaced. Not in the room, but in Malik's mind, a different lobby years ago, smaller, less polished, but familiar in the way power had been used. He had stood in a similar spot, dressed differently but judged the same, told quietly that the space was not for him, that he needed to wait outside until someone confirmed he had a reason to be there. He remembered the feeling, not anger, not even embarrassment, but clarity, the realization that perception could override truth in a matter of seconds, and that systems allowed it to happen again and again until someone changed them. That memory did not slow him down now. It anchored him, sharpened his focus, brought him fully into the present where the same pattern had just repeated itself. Only this time, the outcome would not be the same. Back in the lobby, a man near the front spoke louder than before. "Let him through," he said, not aggressive but firm, and another voice followed. "Yeah, this is getting ridiculous." The pressure was no longer silent. It was building, pushing against the thin wall of authority Ryan was trying to maintain. Ryan glanced around, seeing the shift, feeling it, losing ground without knowing how to regain it. "Everyone just calm down," he said, but the words felt misplaced because he was the one trying to steady something already moving beyond him. Malik did not raise his voice, did not step forward, did not need to. "You called it policy," he said, his tone even, but his words precise. "You called it experience," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "But you did not check anything, you decided." The sentence landed clean, without emotion, but with undeniable weight. And for the first time, Ryan did not respond at all, because there was nothing immediate to say, nothing that could erase what had already been set in motion. Behind him, the monitor changed again, a second alert appearing beneath the first, this one larger, more direct. "Executive review in progress." and Lauren saw it, her eyes widening slightly. "Ryan," she said, her voice lower now, "urgent, this is escalating." But he already knew, not from the screen, but from the room, from the way control had slipped from his hands and into something larger, something structured, something precise, and standing right in front of him was the person who had triggered it all without ever raising his voice. Malik took one small step forward, closing the gap just enough to make his presence undeniable. And in that moment, the entire lobby held its breath, because whatever came next was not going to be the same as before. It was not going to be dismissed. It was not going to disappear. It was going to define everything that followed. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching across the lobby like a held breath that no one dared to release. And in that stillness, Malik did not raise his voice, did not step back, did not adjust his posture. He simply reached into his pocket and brought out his phone again, slow, deliberate, the movement drawing more attention than any shout could have. Ryan's eyes followed it instinctively, not because he expected anything dramatic, but because everything about this moment had already moved beyond routine. Malik tapped the screen once, then held the phone loosely at his side, not even looking at it as he spoke. "It is already in motion," he said, his tone steady, almost quiet, but clear enough to carry across the room. Ryan frowned, the words not making immediate sense. "What is?" he asked, but the answer did not come directly because it did not need to. Behind him, the monitor changed again, the compliance alert expanding into a full-screen notification that pushed aside everything else, the interface shifting into a locked state that required higher authorization. Lauren stepped back slightly, her hand instinctively moving away from the keyboard, as if the system itself had taken control. "Ryan," she said, her voice lower now, almost cautious, "we have been locked out." The words landed, heavier than anything before, not loud, but final. Ryan turned sharply, stepping toward the desk. "That is not possible," he said. But even as he reached for the console, the screen did not respond to his touch. "Access denied" flashed once. Then again, each time more deliberate, more absolute. A man near the entrance let out a quiet breath. "This just got serious," he murmured, and no one disagreed. Malik remained where he stood, watching, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with a calm that made everything else feel unstable by comparison. His phone vibrated once more. This time he glanced at it. A single line from Evelyn. "Board connected. Live review active." Malik gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, then lifted his gaze back to Ryan, who now stood facing the screen as if it had betrayed him. "What did you do?" Ryan asked, turning back, his voice no longer carrying authority, only confusion edged with frustration. Malik met his eyes evenly. "I gave you a chance to check," he said, not accusing, not emotional, just factual. "You chose not to." Ryan shook his head slightly, trying to regain footing. "You cannot just walk in here and override." He stopped mid-sentence because the statement did not hold, because the evidence in front of him contradicted it completely. The system had been overridden, not by force, not by hacking, but by something legitimate, something recognized, something above him. Lauren looked back at the screen, reading quietly. "Executive clearance confirmed," she said, her voice almost a whisper, but the words carried, and the effect was immediate, a ripple through the room, a shift in posture, a recalibration of assumptions. Malik took one small step forward, not aggressive, not urgent, just enough to move into the space Ryan had been guarding minutes ago. And this time, no one moved to stop him. Ryan did not step in front of him, did not raise a hand, because something deeper than instruction held him in place. Uncertainty had taken over, and it showed. "You said you knew who belonged here," Malik continued, his tone unchanged, but now every word felt heavier, anchored by what was unfolding in real time. Ryan's mouth opened slightly, then closed, no immediate response forming, because the certainty he had relied on was no longer there to support him. Behind them, the main elevator doors opened with a soft chime, drawing attention from across the lobby. Two individuals stepped out, both dressed in dark suits, their posture direct, purposeful, not hurried but clearly focused. One of them held a tablet, the other scanning the room quickly before locking onto Malik. They walked forward without hesitation, the space parting for them naturally, not out of command, but out of recognition that something official had just entered the scene. Lauren's eyes widened slightly. "Corporate," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The man with the tablet stopped a few feet from Malik, nodding once in acknowledgement, then turning his attention to Ryan. "We need to speak with you immediately," he said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that did not invite argument. Ryan stood frozen for a fraction of a second, processing, recalculating, but finding no ground to stand on. "About what?" he asked. But the question already sounded hollow, because he knew. Everyone did. The second man glanced briefly at the security desk, then back at Ryan. "About the decision you made at this entrance," he replied, precise, direct, and, in that moment, the entire narrative flipped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. The authority Ryan had claimed minutes ago no longer belonged to him. It had shifted, redirected, redefined, and standing at the center of it all, Malik remained exactly as he had been from the start, calm, composed, and completely in control without ever needing to prove it the way others tried to. The words from the corporate representative did not echo. They settled, heavy and precise, as if the entire room had been waiting for someone with the authority to say them out loud. And Ryan felt it immediately. The shift from control to accountability, from assumption to scrutiny. He straightened his posture out of instinct, but the confidence that once supported it was no longer there. "I was following protocol," he said, the sentence coming out quickly, almost rehearsed, as if saying it fast enough might make it true again. The man with the tablet did not react right away. Instead, he tapped the screen once, scrolling through information that only he could see, then looked back up, his expression neutral but firm. "We reviewed the protocol," he replied calmly. "It requires verification before denial." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, his mind searching for a response that would hold. He did not have identification visible, he said, gesturing slightly toward Malik without fully turning to him, as if still trying to justify the decision without acknowledging the mistake. Malik did not interrupt, did not react. He simply watched, allowing the explanation to unfold on its own, because he knew where it would lead. The second representative stepped slightly to the side, positioning himself where he could see both Ryan and the security desk. His voice measured, controlled. "You made a decision based on appearance," he said, not accusing, but stating, and the sentence landed with more force than anything louder could have. A quiet ripple moved through the lobby, the kind that comes when a truth is spoken plainly, without defense. Ryan shook his head, too quickly. "No, that is not what happened," he replied, but even he could hear the weakness in it now, because the room had already witnessed the moment, because the system had already flagged it, because the narrative had already shifted. The man with the tablet turned it slightly, angling the screen just enough for Ryan to see. "We have access logs, timestamps, and partial footage," he said. "The sequence is clear." Ryan's eyes flicked to the screen, then away, not wanting to fully confront what was being presented. Behind him, Lauren stood still, her earlier hesitation gone, replaced by a quiet understanding of what was unfolding. Malik took one small step forward, closing the distance just enough to bring the focus back to him. And when he spoke, the room leaned in without meaning to. "You said you knew who belonged here," he repeated, his voice steady, not raised, not sharpened, just exact. Ryan looked at him now, fully no longer able to avoid it. "I made a judgment call," he said, the words sounding smaller than before. Malik nodded once, slow, deliberate. "You made a decision," he corrected, then paused, just long enough for the distinction to settle. The room held that pause, every second stretching, every breath measured. Then Malik continued, without checking anything, another pause, deeper this time. "In a building you do not own." The words did not rise, did not demand attention, but they took it anyway, because of what they implied, because of what they revealed. Ryan blinked, the meaning hitting before the confirmation. "What?" he said, the question almost involuntary, and for the first time since this began, there was no attempt to control the situation in his voice, only confusion. Malik met his gaze directly, unflinching. "You stopped me at the entrance," he said, each word placed carefully. "You told me I did not belong." He paused again, not for effect, but for clarity. "In a building I own." The sentence landed with absolute finality, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. And for a moment, Everything in the lobby seemed to freeze, not because people did not understand, but because they understood all. At once, the corporate representative did not react with surprise, because he already knew, because that was why he was there, but the others, the guests, the staff, even Lauren, felt the weight of it settle in real time. Ryan's posture shifted, not dramatically, but enough to show the impact. His shoulders no longer squared with authority, his stance no longer anchored in certainty. "That is not," he started, but the sentence did not finish, because there was nothing to finish it with. The man with the tablet spoke again, his tone unchanged. "Ownership confirmation has been verified," he said, as if reading a line from a document. But the effect was immediate, a second layer of finality added to the first. Malik did not move, did not smile, did not react beyond the stillness he had maintained from the beginning, because this was not about proving something, it was about revealing what had always been true. And now that it was spoken, now that it was confirmed, there was no going back. The narrative that had started at the door had collapsed completely, replaced by something sharper, clearer, and far more difficult to ignore. And standing at the center of it, Malik did not look like someone who had just won an argument. He looked like someone who had simply allowed the truth to arrive on its own terms. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt resolved, like a question that had finally been answered in a way no one could argue with. And for a moment, no one moved, not Ryan, not Lauren, not the guests who had slowly gathered in a quiet witnesses of something far bigger than a simple misunderstanding. The corporate representative glanced once more at his tablet, then back at Ryan. And when he spoke, his tone did not change. It did not rise or sharpen. It simply carried authority that did not need reinforcement. "Your access is being reviewed effective immediately," he said, and the word did not sound like a threat. They sounded like procedure, like something already decided before it was spoken aloud. Ryan blinked, processing, his posture shifting again, this time not into defense, but into something closer to realization. "Reviewed," he repeated, but even as he said it, the word felt temporary, fragile. The second representative stepped forward. Slightly, his gaze steady. "Pending full investigation, your clearance is suspended," he said, and almost on cue, the badge clipped to Ryan's uniform emitted a soft tone. Not loud, not alarming, but unmistakable. The small screen on it flickered from green to red, and that single change seemed louder than anything else in the room. Ryan looked down at it instinctively, his hand hovering over the badge as if he could reverse it by touch alone, but nothing changed behind him. The security console remained locked, unresponsive, no longer under his control. Lauren watched it all unfold with a quiet stillness, her earlier uncertainty replaced by clarity, because now the system was no longer ambiguous. It had chosen a side, and it was not his. A guest near the front exhaled slowly. "That was fast," he said under his breath, and another responded just as quietly. It should have been. The shift was complete now, not just in authority, but in perception. The same people who had watched in silence before were now seeing something entirely different. Not a man being removed, but a system correcting itself in real time. Malik did not step forward into the center of attention, did not claim the space that had just opened for him. Instead, he remained where he was, grounded, composed, as if none of this required effort, as if this was simply the natural outcome of something long overdue. The corporate representative turned slightly toward him, offering a small, respectful nod, not exaggerated, not performative, just acknowledgement. Then he turned back to Ryan. "You will need to step away from this post," he said, again calm, again precise. Ryan hesitated for a fraction of a second, not out of defiance, but out of adjustment, the reality settling in. Then he stepped back, one step, then another, clearing the space he had guarded so firmly just minutes ago. And the contrast was undeniable, the same ground, the same position, but a completely different meaning now. Lauren slowly moved her hand back toward the keyboard, testing the system, and this time it responded, the lock screen fading, access restored, but not to everyone, only to those with the correct clearance. She glanced at Malik briefly, then back to the screen, her respect quiet but evident. A man who had been filming lowered his phone slightly, not because the moment was over, but because it had already delivered what it needed to. The Truth did not require repetition. It had already been seen, already understood. Malik finally moved again, one step forward, crossing fully into the space that had been denied to him before, and no one stopped him. No one questioned it, because now there was nothing left to question. He walked past the security desk without looking down at it, without acknowledging the barrier it had once been, because it no longer mattered. The system had corrected itself, the roles had been reassigned, and the narrative had shifted completely. Behind him, Ryan stood off to the side, no longer the center of authority, no longer the one deciding who belonged, and the room did not need to say anything to confirm it. The silence itself carried that message, and as Malik continued forward, the lobby did not feel like a place he had entered. It felt like a place that had finally recognized him for what it always was his. The lobby did not return to what it had been before, because moments like this did not reset, they redefined, and as Malik walked deeper into the space, the quiet followed him, not out of fear, but out of recognition, the kind that comes when people realize they have just witnessed something that cannot be undone, something that will be talked about long after the room empties. He moved with the same calm precision he had shown from the beginning, passing the reception desk, the seating area, the glass walls that reflected the city beyond, and none of it slowed him down, because this was not about reclaiming space. It was about revealing ownership that had never been lost. Behind him, the corporate representatives remained near the entrance, their presence steady, ensuring that what had been set in motion continued exactly as it should. Ryan stood further to the side now, no longer at the center of anything, his posture quieter, his gaze lowered, not out of shame alone, but out of the realization that everything he had assumed in seconds had now unraveled in front of everyone. Lauren glanced once more at the monitor, the system stable again, but different, more precise, more aware, as if it had learned something in real time. She looked up as Malik approached the elevators, her voice careful but sincere. "Sir," she said, and he paused, not because he needed to, but because he chose to. He turned slightly, giving her just enough attention to acknowledge the moment. "I am sorry for what happened," she added, not as a formality, but as a statement of understanding. Malik held her gaze for a brief second, his expression unchanged but not distant. "Then make sure it does not happen again," he said, his tone calm, not harsh, not forgiving either, just clear, and that clarity carried more weight than any apology could resolve. Lauren nodded once, firmly, as if committing the words to something deeper than memory. Malik turned back toward the elevator, pressing the call button with the same measured motion he had used for everything else. The soft chime sounded, the doors sliding open smoothly, and for a brief moment, the reflection in the polished steel showed him standing there, composed, unshaken, exactly as he had been when he first walked in. But now the room around him had changed to match that stillness. He stepped inside, the doors beginning to close, but before they did, he spoke once more, not loudly, not to a specific person, but to the space itself, to the people who had witnessed everything unfold. "This was never about me," he said, his voice steady, carrying just enough to reach the room. The doors paused for a fraction of a second, as if the building itself was listening. "It is about how many others you have done this to," he continued, and the words settled into the silence like something permanent, something that would not fade when he was no longer there. The doors closed, sealing the moment, the elevator rising smoothly upward, taking him out of sight, but not out of impact. Inside the lobby, no one spoke immediately because there was nothing left to say that would match what had just been said. The system had corrected itself, the roles had shifted, but more importantly, the truth had been exposed, and it lingered in the air long after Malik was gone, a reminder that authority without awareness is fragile, that assumptions can collapse in an instant, and that real power does not need to announce itself to be undeniable. Lauren exhaled slowly, her hands resting on the desk, not returning to routine just yet, because routine no longer meant the same thing. The man who had been filming lowered his phone completely now, not because the moment had ended, but because it had reached its conclusion, complete, undeniable, and somewhere near the entrance, one of the corporate representatives spoke quietly into his device, confirming what had already been seen, what had already been decided. And as the lobby slowly began to move again, conversations returning, footsteps resuming, there was an unspoken understanding shared by everyone who had been there. Something had changed, not just in that building, but in the way it would be remembered. Because what happened in those few minutes was not just a correction of a mistake, it was a statement, one that did not need to be repeated to be heard, one that would stay long after the doors kept turning and the world outside kept moving, because the standard had been raised and it was not going back.